1. Welcome to my session about 10 things you should consider when customizing SharePoint. My name is Matthias Einig. I'm the CEO and founder of Rancor. Gartner is claiming that 9 out of 10 SharePoint deployments are customized. Actually, we at Rancor believe that 10 out of 10 SharePoint deployments are customized, because customization is actually what makes SharePoint great. Everything that any end user would want to do with SharePoint is customize it to adjust it to their own needs, to implement their own business processes. If you do not customize SharePoint, then you're basically not using SharePoint. So in order to get the right feeling about what needs to be done in order to customize it in a right way, first of all, I need to understand the different flavors of customization. So what do we mean with flavors? Well, customizing SharePoint can be done also with no code. So basically, when, for example, somebody is adding a column to a list or a library, for example, a calculated column, or just a column to store metadata, for example, or if somebody adds web parts on pages in order to display content from other places, to aggregate information, news, for example, or even to embed, for example, some code that he found on the internet. But also configurations are some kind of customization. So as soon as I configure SharePoint differently than it is out of the box, it's already customized to some extent. Might not be somehow severe or critical, but it deviates from the standard, which requires more work from an administrative perspective to manage at the end. Well, then we have low-code customizations. With low-code, we understand, for example, customizations done with Microsoft Flow in Office 365 or Microsoft Power Apps, where a business user or a tech-savvy end user can create simple applications with a drag-and-drop editor, combine different data sources in one place, move data from one place to another, and so on. Previously in SharePoint 2010, 13, 16, many used also SharePoint Designer, which is actually deprecated but still available in SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2019. Similar InfoPath forms, which are deprecated and will be discontinued in 2026, I believe. InfoPath forms have been widely used in order to create forms to gather data from end users in a standardized way. And InfoPath made it really simple to design these kind of forms and publish them to SharePoint sites. And then there are loads of third-party platforms available, like, for example, Nintex Forms and Nintex Workflows, Skybowl Rich Forms, K2 Forms and Workflows, Firestar WebCon, and so on. There's a massive amount of third-party vendor solutions which integrate in SharePoint and maybe also other systems in order to modify or access data on SharePoint with very little coding knowledge. Well, and at the end, we have actual coded customizations. With coded customizations, we mean, for example, farm solutions, which are only available with on-premises SharePoint environments, developed in .NET code. Add-ins, for example, provider-hosted or SharePoint-hosted add-ins. That is the next evolution of SharePoint customizations. Provider-hosted add-ins, for example, hosted on Microsoft Azure. SharePoint framework customizations, which are built out of JavaScript components embedded into the SharePoint sites. SharePoint framework is the way to go nowadays to customize SharePoint to your needs and extend it, and the SharePoint framework is getting more and more powerful, now also being extended, for example, into Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Teams. And we have Microsoft Graph extensions, which are using the Microsoft Graph, various endpoints, not just SharePoint, but also, for example, Exchange, in order to access data in the entire Microsoft ecosystem. That we can have embedded scripts on pages. Basically, if you use, for example, a content editor web part or a script editor web part in classic sites, then you can embed a script that you found anywhere on the web. And as soon as somebody opens that page where the script is embedded, the script is executed with the permissions of that user. Then we have PowerShell scripts. These are usually run by administrators, but actually anyone can run PowerShell scripts with his own credentials on SharePoint sites he has access to. Branding is also a coded customization. I wouldn't call CSS, for example, coding, but nevertheless it affects the look and feel and the usability of the SharePoint site, and might affect also supportability at the end. For example, if Microsoft is changing something in Office 365 without your knowledge, and your branding suddenly doesn't work anymore and makes things inaccessible. Well, and then there are loads of third-party solutions that are built in any of those coding styles that I've described just before, that you deploy into your environment and make customizations to your site. So basically, no matter how small, every customization is at the end an application, and is equally at risk and causing maintenance issues, security issues to your data. So second, know the environment's capabilities. You need to understand what your SharePoint environment that you're currently using is actually capable of. So in order to understand that better, we should have a quick look at the evolution of SharePoint. We're looking only at SharePoint 2007 because basically before SharePoint 2007 there was not really a development story or a customization story that actually started with the introduction of form solutions that were packaged in WSP package in SharePoint 2007, which are usually built in .NET in C# and were deployed to your server farm, and could basically do everything on the side, modify everything, and of course also break your SharePoint environment. These are still available in SharePoint 2010, actually still in SharePoint 2019, but in 2010 Microsoft added the first solution in order to in order to avoid harming your SharePoint environment too much or affecting other parts of your SharePoint environment. That were sandbox solutions. Sandbox solutions were a limited set of APIs of the SharePoint form solution framework, and or SharePoint object server-side object model, and sandbox solutions were run in a sandbox, as the name says, which had of course other problems that came with them. So for example, some things were not available, performance was limited, access was limited, and so on. Also InfoPath started to become very popular with SharePoint 2010 and of course SharePoint Designer. Well, and nowadays we do not really separate between 2013, 16, 19 and online, because this is just an evolution step, but the models remain the same no matter where you are at the moment. So here we have the provider hosted apps. We have additionally, for example, Microsoft Flow. We have Power Apps. We have the SharePoint framework, short SPFX. And of course we still have farm solutions as well. So the capabilities in the modern SharePoint development are quite a lot. And apart from the farm solutions, everything also works in SharePoint Online. So once you have understood what you're actually capable of doing, then you should be aware who can actually customize SharePoint and how. So let's look at Microsoft SharePoint. What does it consist of? It consists of business applications, of projects and team sites, business processes that people want to implement in order to make their life easier in daily work. For example, custom forms. We build portals and dashboards to aggregate information to allow employees to access that information at a single place. And then we will build also workflows to automate things. This can be done traditionally by developers, in-house developers, for example, that build code that gets installed to SharePoint. Can be also business users who customize SharePoint, build their processes, build lists, libraries, sites, pages, workflows, and so on. We could have external developers, which do not differ at all from in-house developers, only that they are not part of your company usually, which brings the downside that as soon as they are gone, basically often you do not have a clue what has been actually customized. We can also buy customizations from the App Store or the Microsoft Marketplace. Consultants can upload stuff, for example, into Power BI. We can load external scripts and embed them in pages. So external scripts can run in JavaScript, for example, can be integrated in pages. And when they are embedded externally, then we run risk that maybe somebody who has access to that external storage location, for example, a content delivery network, short CDN, could change the file without our knowledge and could inject code into our SharePoint environment without us knowing at all. These scripts can also change the configuration of sites, and we can build workflows, for example, that transfer data to external services or send emails to external users. Well, and then, our customizations can also give permissions and share documents with users. So quite a lot of people who can be involved, people and systems who can be involved in customizing SharePoint. At the end, basically everyone who is using SharePoint also somehow customizes SharePoint to their needs. So in order to tackle this problem, we have to establish some customization guidelines. And usually you do that with a customization policy that you should also enforce. So here are just some example questions which could be, of course, way more in order to build a governance plan around customizations. But just to give you a little bit of an idea what kind of guidelines you what kind of guidelines you can implement is, for example, which technologies can be used, who can use and implement these technologies, which third-party components are allowed, and which safe locations do we have, who are the ones to customize, is this our internal IT, our end users allowed, the deployment procedures, who is also responsible after a customization hits production? That's also often a thing that is forgotten. So some project is done and completed in order to build a customization, but then suddenly it goes into production and somebody forgets. But unfortunately, even though the code doesn't change, the platform changes, and also, for example, components that are used in my customization might be outdated and need to be updated. But if there's no one responsible for the customization in production, then these customizations can cause additional risks over time. So in order to tackle that, you need to think future-proof. You have to plan for this change. You have to be aware that the platform will change. Microsoft is basically deploying updates every 2 to 4 weeks to SharePoint Online, so it's a very high pace. You as a customer of Microsoft are basically unable to cope with this amount of change. So your customization need to be built in a way that they can live with that change. Also, the technology will change. As you've seen before, we moved from farm solutions in .NET to sandbox solutions with a limited API also in .NET, to add-ins which run in JavaScript and .NET and other languages, to pure JavaScript solutions in SharePoint Framework, and who knows what is coming next. So the technology that is used in order to do things is constantly changing, and you need to prepare for this change, that basically your customizations will still run also in the future. Also, the hosting preferences will change. Although your organization maybe still says, well, we will never go into the cloud, we will always have our full control over our environment on premises, or the other way around, we are in the cloud at the moment. Maybe in the future the organization will change their mind again, and the trend will go back to have everything on premises. You can't be sure what you're doing, so you're building something that you have right now in a way that is still running in the future and can, for example, also run on premises and the cloud, like SharePoint Framework, will help you to cope with this challenge. The main success of SharePoint actually for Microsoft was always that you can customize so many things, and as soon as the customer customizes, they are basically locked into the technology. So it's very hard to move away from a technology where you have invested already so much time in customization and implementing your business needs. So the more you can build your customizations in a way that you can also adapt to change, the better it is for you as an organization, and the easier it is to save these investments that you have done already. Well, and then as usual, the business requirements change. If you gather business requirements for a customization right now, then probably they have changed tomorrow already, because business is evolving constantly and the end users do not really care about the technology underneath and how it's done and how it's implemented. They care about how their business is working and how they can make it more efficient. So you need to be aware that business requirements are constantly changing, and that thus you also have to adapt your customizations easily. I would also urge you not to reinvent the wheel. There are already many out-of-the-box functionalities, and they are constantly increasing. And also, Microsoft is investing a lot together with the SharePoint community into something called the SharePoint patterns and practices, which implement the most common scenarios in SharePoint customization in a standardized core library, which is maintained by the community and Microsoft together and fully supported by Microsoft. So before you build something, I strongly urge you to look into the SharePoint patterns and practices if somebody has already built it there into that library, and use it from there, because then you have a very well tested customization already and can focus on the actual specific part, for example, your business process. The patterns and practices group also provides, for example, a starter pack to start your customization journey, as well as an intranet starter pack to build a simple intranet start page. There are also plenty of third-party solutions and third-party frameworks. So you probably, if you are a developer, have heard, for example, of jQuery or Angular or React and so on. So there are loads of third-party frameworks which help you to standardize your development and also to structure development, to focus more on the actual implementation of your business specific parts and not building the next forms library or the next visualization framework and so on. So be aware of these functionalities or third-party components that already exist, and don't reinvent the wheel. What's also often the case is that customers do not start on the greenfield. They have already SharePoint in place. They have already invested a lot into their existing environment. So we urge you that you transform instead of rebuild everything, or that you modernize existing investments instead of rebuilding everything. So how can that be done? Well, you can analyze existing environments first of all for customizations. Often organizations have no clue anymore what has been customized in their environment, which causes a lot of challenges when you are moving to a new SharePoint environment. So a content migration tool does not help you alone in order to move from on-prem into the cloud, or from SharePoint 2010 to 2019. Now you also have to understand what has been customized, and often these systems have been long time around, and the people who have done the customizations are long gone, or the consultancies do no longer exist. Documentation is usually very rare. So in order, you should analyze your existing environments, for example with a tool from Rancor, and understand what customizations do you have. Once you know that, you identify their usage and the impact of those customizations, because maybe some of them are no longer used, and if they're no longer used, well, then there is no need to transform or modernize or migrate those customizations into a new environment. You can just get rid of them and decustomize it in order to make your life much easier. You should also review the validity of the business requirements. So even though maybe they are still used, and in the current environment, maybe the business actually hates those customizations. They need something totally different, but they use them because they don't have any other choice. So or maybe are not aware that this is actually custom built and that it can be adjusted. That's often also the case. So before you invest in any transformation or modernization of customizations, you should ask the business who's currently using those customizations if they actually still need that, for what purpose they need that. Because as we heard before, the requirements have most likely changed over the time. Once you have identified the customizations that need to be transformed, then you should assess the complexity and the reusability. There are actually quite a lot of things that can be reused when you're moving from one on-prem version to another, or from on-prem into the cloud. For example, farm solutions, as I mentioned before, can quite easily actually move from SharePoint 2010 to 2019. So you might just need to rebuild them to a newer .NET framework, maybe double check the APIs, and then you're mostly done. Or even if you move from on-prem to the cloud, you can use, for example, our tool to help you to transform declarative code to client-side code, and then implement an add-in instead that builds a similar functionality in your environment. Then you should define the target implementation. So as we've seen before, there are many different ways how you customize your SharePoint environment, and you should define, okay, how do we actually want to do that in the future? Do we want to do that as add-ins? Do we want to remain on farm solutions? Do we want to build SPFX components, or should we re-implement it in InfoPath or in Flow, for example? So that's the next step, and the last step is then, where possible, transform the code automatically. Next, you should be, of course, also aware of the security risks that are imposed by these customizations. So going back to our slide that we had before, the different roles and systems that can customize SharePoint or access SharePoint. Well, in-house developers could deploy unverified or untested code, and that could cause issues. If you're a developer, I don't know who in the audience is a developer. Raise your hands. All right. So you probably know that there's just too much third-party code to get actually reviewed. Who of you has ever reviewed a jQuery library that usually comes minified, or an Angular library? And if that is downloaded from a wrong place, from a place where it might be affected with some code that has been injected, then you're basically injecting that code into your own environment. You've heard maybe just recently, last week, I believe, there was a news coming out that an NPM package, for those who do not know, NPM is a code repository that allows developers to load code basically into their own solutions for standard components. And there was a malicious code injected in one package that had about 2 million downloads per week, and that malicious code was a Bitcoin miner. So if you have this package in your solution, and trust that service NPM, which usually all of the developers do, then you might have been affected by some code that has been injected into one dependency that is used in your customization, and suddenly you have a Bitcoin miner running on your websites, and all your end users' internet browsers are secretly mining Bitcoins for some hacker somewhere in the world. So just to give you a little bit of an idea. This is actually a real life scenario that just happened. So similar, business users, of course, can also upload bad scripts from the internet. There are loads of blogs that explain you, okay, how to achieve a certain business problem. Okay, just copy this piece of JavaScript code, paste it into a web part, and the content editor web part, save the page, publish it, and then it works. But that page is then actually executed with the end user's permissions. So if you lure somebody onto that page who has higher privileges, then that code is executed with that person's privileges. I will show you in a moment how this actually would look like as an example. Also, if you buy or install something from the App Store, well, Microsoft is actually not reviewing every detail of the code. They're reviewing, first of all, the functionality of the app. So if you install an add-in from the App Store, well, you don't know actually what you're getting. If you look through the end-user license agreement of the App Store, then you actually learn that every provider of an add-in through the App Store has the right to contact any user that is using the add-in via email, so they can retrieve that email through the add-in and target or market their solution through it. But it can be also used, of course, to gather emails in order to build some email marketing or sell those emails to the highest bidder. So just imagine that. Well, if you have third-party consultants who build something, then the same rules apply as with in-house developers. So they build something, you have no clue what they are actually building, and you blindly trust them. I heard many of our customers who say basically, well, I don't know, actually, when I have a third-party provider, a solution integrator who builds something for me, then I have warranty on anything that he messes up, if they have bugs or any security leaks, and if something goes wrong, then I will call them out and they will have to pay for that. Yeah, that sounds nice in theory, but well, if there's a security leak introduced in with a customization built by your external developer or your consultant, and which causes a data leak of your company's data and at the end reputational damage, then it doesn't really help you that you can sue your provider. The reputational damage has been done. So I wouldn't trust this kind of solution if I were you. Yeah, scripts can also be exploited. So as I mentioned before, scripts can be stored on external content delivery networks, can be embedded into your applications, but you do not know who has access to that content delivery network. So that could basically be the target of attack, not your environment directly. And then if that gets attacked, then the code gets injected in your SharePoint site without your knowledge. Similar if you buy third-party solutions and the third-party provider is running the solution or the third-party customization on their own environment, if they get attacked and their customizations are compromised somehow and get then run in your environment, then you have no chance, first of all, to find out, and second of all, to somehow mitigate that risk, because well, you do not have any access. So no matter how secure your environment is, if the environment of your third-party provider is less secure, then that's basically the weakest link for your environment. So the external services can be hacked, for example. Then yeah, well, if you look at Microsoft Flow and all these other workflow providers, then users can build workflows that transmit data from one service to another. So they can, for example, build a workflow that copy every SharePoint file from a document library to their personal OneDrive or to Dropbox, or tweet it out, or to an Excel list on Google Drive, or there are plenty of data connectors. Microsoft provides already capabilities to limit who is allowed to do what, but somebody needs to configure these things. So you have to be aware of that as well. And code can do basically anything on behalf of the user, especially JavaScript code. JavaScript code runs in the browser, runs with the permission context of the user. So it can do whatever it wants with the permissions of the user. And not only within SharePoint. Thanks to the Microsoft Graph, code that you execute on a SharePoint page has also access to all the emails of that user, or has access to, for example, search, and has access to any other connected service that is available in the Microsoft Graph. So just be aware of that. I'll give you a short example how this actually looks like. So I'll show you a quick video. And in this video, you will see a normal Office 365 page, and you see some subtitles down there, but I will talk you through. So on this page of Contoso, we are on the marketing and communication department, and they wanted to have a carousel here underneath that hero image in order to stay on top of their announcements. So the developer got a jQuery carousel, which is ready built. So as I mentioned before, use already existing components. But what they did not know that this widget is actually hacked, and the code that he copied leaks information. It connects as soon as the page is loaded by Paddy, in this case the CEO of Contoso. It connects to an Azure site. And if you look there, it connects to an Azure website with a call that somehow tries to look like jQuery, but in the background it actually connects to the inbox of the CEO and looks for confidential documents with search, in this case the salary plan, and automatically forwards that file to Bob, who is basically the hacker. So in this case, very simply shown, you see that a script can be easily executed, and you search an email and is not caught by any security measure that you currently have, because it runs on a trusted Azure website that is by default trusted from Microsoft. So let's go back. In order to cope with that, the only way what you can do is to monitor and govern customization continuously, unless you do not want to turn them off entirely. So to do that, well, you have to be aware of the constantly changing risks in your environment. These security vulnerabilities will appear unexpected. This means, you might be in a good place at the time when build something, but now, for example, as I told you just before, with that npm package, there's an update that gets introduced in a new build that you deploy to your environment, and that update includes the vulnerability or the code. Or the vulnerability was always there and just hasn't been discovered. Your code is already running, nobody is really looking at it, and then suddenly a vulnerability is discovered, and as you're not aware of it, you're not checking it and replacing that piece of code. End users will also customize without IT knowing. So especially with Microsoft Flow and Power Apps, customers are basically changing, end users are basically changing everything all the time. And either you want to empower them to do that, then you lose, of course, control somehow, or you log everything down. And so it's very important that you monitor the customizations in order to enable end users to do those customizations without basically losing control and running any risk. The dependent code problem I just described before. Also the third-party services that will be updated without warning. So for example, if you buy, I'm not naming a specific name, but if you buy a third-party provider's workflow solution, for example, that is hosted on their environment, well, they update stuff all the time. If they have a bug, they update it, but you will not get any warning. They will not tell you. And if they introduce a security vulnerability into their code, you will have no clue at all that this is coming, and they will definitely not tell you if they know. So, and also the APIs and capabilities that Microsoft provides are constantly changed, removed, and added. So even though you build something today that works with the existing APIs, Microsoft might decide in a year from now that they are deprecating a specific API, and then suddenly your code might not work anymore without you having changed anything. So you need to be aware what APIs your customizations are currently using that are live, and be warned in advance to make sure that you are tackling that problem before it becomes a problem. Well, and the custom solutions themselves will constantly degrade, so you have to be aware of that as well. So last but not least, the 10th recommendation: you assess your customization risk, and of course, with whom else can you do that? Well, this is why we are here at Rancor. We provide solutions to help you to customize without doing a compromise here, to empower your end users while doing that, while running your customization securely. So Rancor provides solutions to help you with app security, app governance, app modernization, and app management for SharePoint and Office 365. So if you're interested to learn more about our solutions, then please feel free to come to our stand outside, and we're happy to have a talk with you and explain you a little bit more. And we are also doing a free customization risk assessment of your environment, both on-prem and in the cloud. So if you're interested in that, please have a chat with us. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you have any further questions, feel free also to reach out to me via email or Twitter. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.